Welcome everyone. This is Michael from the Marks Group Live. Happy to be reviewing setting up a face-to-face session in Zoho Showtime. After this video is over, please feel free to email us at support@marksgrouplive.com for any questions on this topic or on anything else Zoho. Also be sure to rate this class as well, helping out your fellow Zoho users and helping us to improve our video library. Showtime is Zoho's web conferencing and online virtual training system. Using Showtime, your learners can follow along with a live presentation, they can share your screen, request microphone access, like your slides, pose questions, answer polls, and provide feedback on your session. In other classes, we've set up the Showtime environment itself, we've set up a Showtime remote session, and we've hosted a remote session. So in this class, I'm going to set up a face-to-face session. Now, if you've already watched the video on setting up a remote session, you can probably skip this video. Most of the settings are similar. On the other hand, if you're specifically interested in using Showtime for face-to-face sessions, keep on watching. Here are the specific topics we'll cover in this class. We'll look at setting up the basic settings, setting up participant registration policies, how to share details about your session, inviting participants, a few more settings, and then finally we'll look at duplicating a session. A word of suggestion though, before we get into our Zoho screens, if your screen doesn't look exactly like mine, do not panic. Your Zoho instance may be set up slightly differently from mine, and there may be a few differences in some of the screens. Most of what I demonstrate today should work across all versions of Zoho Showtime with minimal differences. If you try to replicate what I'm doing and you get stuck, drop us an email at support@marksgrouplive.com and we'll see what we can do to help you out. Another quick note, Showtime prefers either Firefox or Chrome as a browser. I'll be using Firefox in this work. I've also discovered that the Opera browser appears to work well as a client. Now, just as with a remote session, I'm going to start my face-to-face sessions by going to the session menu and clicking on Create Session. So we'll find that up in the top right corner. Now up at the top, I'm going to define this as a face-to-face session. And I'll give my session a name. Let's say face-to-face MGL session 1. And I'll include a short description. Demo session for Showtime face-to-face setup. All right. I'm going to leave the rest of these parameters as they are, except I will set the date for tomorrow. I'm going to create a session. Now, when we do our class on hosting a face-to-face session, we'll look at how we can set up a session with the least possible effort using all the defaults so that we can get started more quickly. In this lesson, however, I'm going to go through all those options so that you know how much flexibility you have. Now, here's our Sessions Details tab. We have 4 of them across the top of the screen here. We have Session Details, Registration, Pricing, Promote, People, and Settings. The Pricing tab we happen to have because we were on the professional version of Zoho Showtime. In our introduction to Zoho Showtime, I do cover the different tiers of Showtime so that you can get a sense of whether the pricing functionality is something that is important to your organization and how much you're likely to pay for it. In the professional tier, we do get access to the pricing option. Let's see. The first of the subsections here, session details. The edit session up here, this corresponds, in fact, the session details and the trainers here, both of these areas, corresponds to what we set up when we created the session in the first place, so we can actually go back to that. I'm going to cancel that because I'm happy with the way that's been set up. But I can edit that. I can go back and edit that if I need to. Up here, there's a session join link. This is nifty. This is how my learners will be able to access my session. Now I can choose to edit that by giving it a different name. I can set it to something that might be more human friendly, but that may depend on whether somebody else is already using that code. So depending on that may be not such a terribly great idea, because it's possible that other people may be using the code that you had in mind. Also, if you change the key, then the previous versions of the key will not change. Well, I'm sorry, will not be valid. So here I can add a trainer, or I can change trainers if I want to. I can edit some of the information about the trainer. I won't bother to do that at this point, but I will note that being able to add a co-trainer is incredibly powerful. If you're running a large session or a complex session, having a co-trainer means that you can have one person more or less presenting the session, one person who's the primary trainer and one person who's working more in the background, handling things like questions or triggering polls. It's a very powerful feature, having multiple trainers. Now, one important difference between a remote session and a face-to-face session is that in a face-to-face session, I do not have a recording option there. So whereas the session details and registration, in fact, almost all these things are identical. Let's see if I've got that here. Right, so there are my trainers. The recording option is not accessible when you're hosting a face-to-face session. The session material, however, this allows me to create, this is essentially the presentation that you're working off of when you're doing your face-to-face session. So you can create a new presentation. I can upload either a PowerPoint document or a PDF from my computer, or I can pick something from my library, just to give you a sense of what that looks like. These are presentations that are already in my PowerPoint, in my Zoho Docs library. So I'll just click on that one and I'll add it. The Zoho Show application, it's similar to Google's Google's presentation app. Now I do have to mention one limitation. As far as I can tell, and I've confirmed this actually in an email, Zoho only allows you to load one document as session material. Now, for some types of training and trainers, that won't be an issue, but you should be aware of that as you prepare your session materials. Zoho apparently does have this on its roadmap somewhere as a new feature coming up in the next couple of months to add multiple materials to a single session. Finally, if I scroll down here a little bit, I can create a new poll, or I can import one from our library. In fact, I can import more than one. Let me just grab all of those. It is possible to create a poll on the fly while you're actually running your face-to-face session. It is possible to create one. However, unless you have a second trainer who's actually doing that with you while you run your session, unless you have a second trainer, I don't recommend that you create one on the fly. Unless you're really, really fast at typing and super, super accurate. Unless, of course, your learners are engaged in another activity while you're creating the poll. And as I mentioned, unlike session materials, you can have an unlimited number of polls. The next tab over, up at the top here, is registration. Now, the first thing, this is where we control how registration happens, not actually who is doing the registering of learners in your session. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to enable registration for this session. And here's what this means. If I do not enable registration, then anybody who happens to have the link can join this session without providing any information. So I can have entirely anonymous users. But I'm going to check this so we can explore it. Now, once we've checked that button, we get a large number of options in about 3 main subsections: the registration details, the advanced settings, and the registrant redirection. And basically, this amounts to getting user details, figuring out who can register, and how you share information. So, first, up in the top area, we get to see what kind of information we can request from participants. At the very least, when we enable registration, we're going to get the participant's first name, last name, or email. Note that this information does not in any way, gathering this information does not mean you're getting the truth. It merely means that somebody's putting some information into those fields. And it will validate the email address to make sure that it's that it could be a correct email address. So it has to be formatted as if it's an email address. We can also add some more fields to this. So here are some predefined fields. So I can add, let's say I want to add the state. So I see where people are attending my session. And of course, if I don't like that, I can delete it. But I'll keep it. I can also potentially move things around, except that the first 3 fields are fixed. I can't move the first 3 fields around. Let me do that. Now you can see that the optional fields I can move from one place to another. I can also add custom fields, and this is exactly what you think it would be. For example, let's say that I'm doing an internal training event, but I want to see which division of the company my users are coming from. So to make this happen, I'll set this up as a multiple choice, and my label will be company division. I'll leave that as an optional field. Let's say multiple answers are possible. So let's say North America, Central America, South America, and Europe, and Asia, or Australasia. All right. Now I'll leave that mandatory. I'll leave that, I won't check the mandatory box. Quick user experience tip: the more fields you require from people, the less happy they will be about completing your forms. So let's add that. And I'll move company division up just below first name, last name, and email. Down in the advanced settings area, I can automatically allow registrants to join the session, or I can manually approve or deny participants. That's down here, this pair of radio buttons. But if I've sent an email to somebody who uses that email address to register, then that person is automatically allowed, even if I've checked this button. So, for example, if I send an invitation to michaelf@marksgroup.net, then if anybody who logs in with the email address michaelf@marksgroup.net will automatically be allowed to join, even if we have manual registration checked there. So the providing a valid email address for, in the People tab, which is what we'll get to shortly, that overrides the manual registration process. And finally, I can choose to see what happens when somebody has registered. I can leave them on the registration page, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment, or I can send them to a new web page. I can set a new page. It's like the opposite of a landing page. So if I send successful registrants to a new page, I can show them content that sets them up for the session. I can send them to a page that promotes another event or another product or service of my organization. And I really can't overstress the value of doing that. Once somebody has registered for my session, there is a sense of expectation of something that's going to happen. And by giving them some materials in advance, privileged materials perhaps, they'll be in a better position to engage with you in an active way rather than just passively listening to what you're dealing with in your session. So it's a really powerful user experience feature, and I think your learners will enjoy it. For the time being, I'm going to leave it like that because this is a demo session. Now, before I leave the registration tab up here, though, I'll draw your attention to the registration preview. If I scroll up, there it is. View registration page. Zoho very conveniently offers a preview of the registration window here. I'm going to click on that. And this is what the a registrant will see when you send them the link or when they access the link to register for your session. I really strongly recommend that you use this preview function the first couple of times that you're creating sessions in Showtime. So I can scroll down here. There's some information. It says this session begins in 23 hours. I can add it to my calendar, so I've got the usual links. I can change my time zone relative to the session. There is the description of the session that we created. There is the trainer profile. I can also view the trainer's profile. And you can see that the trainer actually hasn't added too many details here. There's no picture. Of course, I recommend that you use information about the trainer to personalize the session so that people get a sense that they're dealing with a human rather than with a bot or just a cog in a machine. You can also join via the mobile app using that QR code. There's also a plug here for the Showtime Viewer app. I have to admit that the Showtime Viewer app is interesting. At this point, though, as of mid-2019, it appears that the web interface does pretty much everything that the Showtime Viewer app does, although the viewer may be more efficient. I haven't tested I don't have metrics on the efficiency of the app versus the web interface. So let's see. Oh, one more thing about this window. In Showtime, when you have screens like this that come up in the top right corner, there's usually an escape button or a cancel button. So if I click that, I come back to here. Final feature on the registration page that's also really great is the embed. So I can embed my registration form by copying and pasting this text into my blog, into my website. But what's brilliant is that I can create different embed codes. So what happens is, if I click on the word embed up here, what will happen is I can say website. Now, if your eyes are clever and you've spotted the motion, you'll see that down here in the code that gets copied, source equals website. Let me change the word website to blog. Now it says source equals blog. Or I can say Twitter. What this means is that you could create an embed code for your website's homepage, another embed code for your blog, another embed code on a landing page, another embed code on social media sites, each social media site or each account on each social media site. And this will tell Zoho where a registrant is coming from, and you can check that out actually in the analytics. This means that you can start to track where your promotion work is having the greatest effect. It's really, really powerful in the sense of being able to evaluate the ROI for the various channels on which you're promoting your session. Now, let me get out of there. By the way, on the right side here, this is what the session, this is what the embed code will look like. So on your web page, on your social media, there will be a link. This is when when your participant clicks on the link, this is what they'll see. So there's the preview. Let me escape out of there, and we're back to here. You'll also notice company, division, country, and state. There's state, country, and company division down here. All right. We're going to skip the pricing tab for the time being. We will have a separate lesson specifically on monetizing your training. If you look for it in our library and you don't find it, let us know and we'll get that over to you as soon as we can. But I'm going to skip that for now. Suffice it to say that if the rest of the Zoho Showtime interface works for you, if you find that it's an effective platform for delivering content and engaging with users, and I will say the user engagement stuff is really incredible, is incredibly powerful, very helpful, very powerful, and that alone may be should probably be worth considering the platform if you're a trainer. And if you find that the Zoho Showtime interface is useful for you, you can use tickets. You can essentially sell tickets by connecting Zoho Showtime to a payment gateway or to a payment processor, and that way you can monetize your training. Obviously, in a corporate context, it's probably not going to be as important to do so. Let's go over to the Promote tab. This, again, is brilliant. Let me skip to my next slide here. Now, there are three ways that we can do sharing. We can embed the registration form, we can embed the session, and we can share a link to the session. This embed the registration form, this actually is exactly like the embed code that we just looked at on the registration tab. It embeds the registration wherever you paste that little code snippet. So I can copy that code snippet and embed that into my website, into my blog. You can even load it into an HTML email. Now, of course, by changing this name, we make it possible to track where the content is, where your visitors are coming from. And on the right side here, it gives you a sense of the visual, what it will look like. State, country, and company division. This information is what we set up in the registration tab. So if you want to change that, you'll have to go back to the registration tab. You only have, you can only set up one embed per session, in the sense that I can't have a completely different set of registration options, several different registration options for the same session. So that embed form will look the same for all sessions. I can have one embed code for a session. The origin of the code may change, but the actual visual appearance of it will be the same. So the embed session, this gives us the ability to embed a link to the session. That's not the registration form, it's the link to the session itself. As with embedding the registration form, we can choose where the link is going to be shared. Once again, we can say mail blast. There's that information. So this is so we can embed the link in a bunch of places, and Zoho will be able to tell us where we get the most traction. I can change the size of the widget. That's the widget over there. Right now it's a wide widget. I can turn it into a square. Well, it's not quite square. Almost square widget or a vertical widget. So depending on where you're placing this widget, maybe in a company newsletter, in an email blast, on a website, this would work. The vertical orientation obviously would work well on a sidebar. The square, that would probably work well in a grid, and the full banner might work fine just as a default for a straight horizontal presentation. And finally, let me escape out of there. We can share the session link itself. Once again, we have the destination, which we can change. If I want to embed this in an email, I can say where the source is coming from, or I can say website, or I could say social. This way, when people visit our session, we can tell where they came from. This diagnostic and again information is so useful because it tells you where your promotions are effective and where they aren't. And that's simply a link so that people can come into your session. Now, I'm not going to check this bottom box. Since this is a practice account, I don't actually want our simulated session to be quite so publicly visible. But I'm going to leave that unchecked. One sub-tab over, we can invite people to our session. It's one thing to post a link to the session and ask people to fill out a registration form. It's another thing to send them an email directly inviting them to your session. Whether this is useful to you probably depends equally on the session and your relationship to the people that you're inviting. So if you're a trainer in an organization, you might want to invite people directly. You could also invite people directly if you're hosting a session and you happen to have a mailing list, and you can tell people, hey, I'm doing a session on Zoho Showtime, so please come and visit my session. Now, there are 3 sub-tabs here: invite people, edit, invite email, and copy session details. So under invite people, I have not, you'll see here, Zoho CRM, if I had integrated our version of Showtime with our Marks Group Live CRM, you could see that I would be able to choose people from our CRM by using filters and selectors. So I can say, for example, everybody in the North American division of our company will get an invite. The other option here is to use custom invitation. I can upload an Excel file, I can upload a CSV file, or I can just type addresses, email addresses, into this field. f@marksgroup.net. And I can use either the enter or the tab, or use the comma to separate email IDs. So if I use a comma there, and info@marksgroup.net, use the tab. So this is how I submit email addresses if I just want to manually type them. It's really good that Zoho offers us the option to have to upload via Excel or CSV, because if you're manually inviting people, it's either going to be a lot of typing. You could also, I suppose, cut and paste a comma delimited list, but it's likely to be a fair amount of work typing every address individually. When I click on invite attendees, I see that email went out. I can resend the invitation, and I can click to see details on that participant. Here's the information that I'm getting thus far. And this user has not yet completed the registration. Now, let me go back for a moment. I've invited Michael F. at marksgroup.net to this session. So in the registration area, I've said manually allow or deny access to each registrant. So this is the manual as a trainer or as the administrator. I may be able to allow or deny participants, except that I invited Michael F. using invite people. So that person is going to join the session automatically. That person is already essentially pre-registered or pre-cleared to register for the session. All right, let's see. Oh, what does it look like when we send an email? Well, we can edit the invite email. This is what it looks like. Invitation for person's name goes in there. Reply to, I can edit that address. We are sure that you will find the session to be very helpful in your professional work. So as I make changes, you'll see it up here. There really isn't a whole lot of that we can set here. This will save us the effort of creating a complex layout and banging text and graphics into it. And if you've ever struggled with an unwieldy MailChimp template, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, interestingly enough, Zoho does note that it supports Opera as a browser for the end user. And of course, there's a link to register right there. Our description, session description that we set earlier is right here. I'm going to save that for now. I can also copy the session details right here. This is very simple stuff. I can just copy that, and now it's a rich text. It's a bunch of rich text that I can copy into any message board. I can copy that into an email. It's very simple. It's very clean. There's our attendance code, our attendance link. So it's going to be very easy for me to send this to people in any number of different ways. That's something that's very powerful about how Zoho Showtime is set up. It makes handling registration really easy. Our last tab here, settings, has 4 sub-tabs. So let me do this. I've already invited people. I've edited the invitation email. We've copied the session details. We've done that. So let's go on to the next one. Getting participant feedback, or more options. So there are 4 sub-tabs or sub-tabs here: general, evaluation, email reminders, and themes. Now the email reminders sub-tab. Actually, let's go to general. Let's stay on general. This is where we can specify exactly how many people we allow into the session. As I mentioned earlier, we're on Showtime Professional, which means I can have up to 100 people attending the session, or I may decide that I want to have fewer. I can set 25 people. Now, I don't think I can set more than 100 people. Nope. So I'll leave that as 25. Remember, this is for a face-to-face session. For remote sessions, you may want numbers that are higher or lower. Now, this is interesting. We can determine whether incoming questions that are sent by participants are public by default. If we leave it unchecked, we can still make the questions public. We can still make incoming questions public, but we have to do it manually on a per question basis. If I check this, actually I'm going to leave it checked, because this way, this is the private option, this is the public option. So I can make questions visible to everybody, even if I've checked this for privacy. As an experienced trainer, I really strongly recommend that you leave this checked, both for the sake of your participants and for yourself. If your participants know that their questions are instantly going to be public, that may have a chilling effect on their willingness to ask questions. There's a level of sensitivity there to the learner's perspective. And finally, show a customized survey form to all attendees as soon as the session ends. This survey is found in the second sub-tab under evaluation. For this session, I'm going to leave that evaluation exactly as it is. I'm going to leave that exactly as it is. But let me just preview it. Let's go to evaluation. Here we go. There are 2 questions that are set up by default. Please rate the session and give feedback. I can preview this. This is what it will look like at the end of a session. People will be invited to rate the session and give feedback. I can also add a question. For example, multiple choice. I can say, based on this presentation, on this class, I will apply for a promotion, seek alternative employment, or try to become a trainer just like you. All right, that is very silly, but that's what it was. This is the new evaluation form at the end of a session, and once again we can preview it. And here we have our rating, our text feedback, and our multiple. That's not a multiple choice because it's a checkboxes. So that's how it looks. That's how the end of session evaluation works. Email reminders. I can send reminders out to people. Now the reason this is grayed out, the second one, because my session starts in less than a day. So I don't have access to that one. I can also send out reminders, email before an hour, notification email before the beginning of a session, and I can send out a thank you email as well. I can check that. I can add our customized survey form to the thank you email. I can edit the email here. This again is very powerful stuff in terms of maintaining a connection to your participants. If you don't do this sort of thing, your participants are going to have far more of a, well, yeah, in and out sort of, it will be a transient, it is more likely to be regarded as a transient sort of thing if your participants don't have these hooks, these little reminders, courteous reminders to say, hey, the session that you signed up for is starting in such and such a time, and then the post work, the work afterwards, is helpful as well to say thank you for attending the session, and we can add information as well. Hope to see you for our next session. This content, of course, can be modified. And there's a link to participate in the survey afterwards. So what Zoho gives us the ability to maintain this connection with our participants, so that to them it's less of a transient phenomenon. And finally, we have our theme for the registration page. I don't know if this is supposed to be a joke, the look and feel of the registration page with these exciting themes. Light, dark, daytime, nighttime, daytime, nighttime. Now those are all of our session setup parameters. That's it. So there are an awful lot of them. And you're thinking that this is an amazingly long list of things to set up every time before we actually start delivering the content, teaching the material to our learners. So here's the bit of good news. It is possible to duplicate a session. Now, when we're editing a session, there's always in the top right corner here 3 little buttons. Launch lets me actually start the session regardless of when it is in the future. In fact, I can even launch the session during the session, during the assigned time. So if I've set the session to happen on Monday at 2 p.m., I can actually launch the session anytime before then or anytime before it's supposed to end. So even if the session is supposed to run from 2 to 3, I don't even have to launch it until 2:30 or 2:59. I can launch it anytime. Another interesting thing is that once you've launched a session, it doesn't end until you tell it that it ends, regardless of what you set in the schedule. I can cancel a session if I've done all this work and I think, no, I'd rather not run the session at all because I just like setting up sessions. Yes, you could do that, but I don't recommend it. And finally, we can duplicate the session. This last function, duplicating a session, is great. It means that I can set up a session and then duplicate it rather than having to set all the usual parameters every time we conduct the session again. Of course, you can always edit a particular parameter to suit any session's unique circumstances, but having a library of a few sessions that you copy like a template is going to save time and allow you to focus on more useful tasks. Every time you edit a duplicated session, you'll probably want to adjust the name, the date, and the time. In fact, the date and the time are going to be mandatory. You may want to adjust the description as well, so that people who have already done a session don't think that this is the same thing happening again. So depending on the nature of the learning experience they're trying to deliver, you may want to edit other parameters, but certainly name, date, and time you'll probably want to edit every time you've duplicated a session. Let's duplicate that after all. There we go. I duplicate the session, and now I'm back into the editing up there with my 6 main tabs. And that is the process to set up a remote session in Zoho Showtime. Let's go back to here. Here are the specific topics that we covered in this class today. We looked at basic settings for Zoho Showtime. We looked at participation registration policies, how to share details about your session so you can drum up interest in it, inviting participants directly. We looked at even more settings in the settings menu with the 4 sub-tabs, and we looked at how to duplicate a session so you don't have to redo your work every time you want to set up a new session. It's like using a template. So I do hope that you've enjoyed this video. Check out our library for other training videos like this one, and if you have any suggestions for other classes or for questions that you have about Zoho, email us at support@marksgrouplive.com. And thanks for viewing.